I was 20 when I was in Metallica. So I probably started when I was around maybe 17, 18.
Dave Mustaine was born on September 13, 1961, in La Mesa, California. Growing up in a broken home with an abusive alcoholic father, Mustaine found escape in music. By age 17, he was already playing in local bands, teaching himself guitar techniques that would later define thrash metal. Even as a teenager, his talent was unmistakable. His fingers moved across the fretboard with a speed and precision that made other young guitarists stop and stare. While school wasn't always Mustaine's focus, music was. He spent hours practicing guitar, studying the techniques of hard rock guitarists like Jimmy Page and Ritchie Blackmore. By his late teens, he had developed a distinctive playing style characterized by lightning-fast alternate picking and complex, aggressive riffs. This technical proficiency would soon catch the attention of the emerging metal scene in California. In 1981, Mustaine's life changed when he joined a new band called Metallica. Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield had placed an advertisement in a local paper looking for a lead guitarist. Mustaine showed up to the audition with his guitar and no amplifier. According to band lore, he plugged into Hetfield's amp, played a series of solos that left the room speechless, and was immediately invited to join the band. During his time with Metallica, Mustaine co-wrote several songs that would become metal classics, including The Four Horsemen, originally called The Mechanics, Jump in the Fire, and parts of Metal Militia. His aggressive playing style and intense personality helped shape Metallica's early sound, pushing them toward what would eventually be known as thrash metal. However, Mustaine's tenure with Metallica was volatile and short-lived. His struggles with alcohol and drugs, combined with a confrontational personality, created tension within the band. The breaking point came in April 1983, when Metallica was in New York preparing to record their debut album, Kill 'Em All. After a series of incidents, including a physical altercation with Hetfield, Mustaine was fired from the band. He was woken up one morning, given a bus ticket back to California, and told his services were no longer needed. For nearly 40 years, James Hetfield maintained a careful public stance when discussing Mustaine. "Water under the bridge," he'd say, or "that's ancient history." But privately, the situation was more complex. Hetfield believed the firing was necessary, despite recognizing Mustaine's immense talent. The band couldn't function with the constant volatility. Dave was an incredible guitar player, maybe too good for his own good sometimes, Hetfield revealed. But the drinking, the fights, it wasn't just once or twice. It was every day, every show, every rehearsal. We were kids trying to keep a band together, and it became impossible. Lars Ulrich was more direct about the situation, often suggesting in interviews that keeping Mustaine would have destroyed the band before it had a chance to succeed. "We didn't wake up one morning and decide to fire Dave. We tried for months to make it work. We had meetings, made promises to each other, tried everything. But when your guitar player is getting into fistfights with the band, with the audience, with random people, eventually you have to make a choice: the music or the chaos." According to former Metallica road manager Mark Whitaker, the band gave Mustaine multiple chances. The night before he was let go, he got into a physical altercation with James and poured beer over Ron McGovney's bass, shorting out his amp. It wasn't a one-time incident, it was the final straw in a pattern that had become unsustainable. Lars Ulrich was reportedly the most adamant about making the change. Sources close to the band claim that Ulrich had already begun quietly scouting replacement guitarists weeks before the final confrontation. His business-minded approach to the band's future conflicted with the chaotic energy that dominated their early shows. This dismissal left Mustaine bitter and determined to create something that would outshine his former bandmates. The bus ride from New York to California became legendary in metal circles. It was during this journey that Mustaine reportedly began formulating plans for a new band that would play music even faster and more technical than Metallica. By late 1983, Mustaine had formed Megadeth with bassist David Ellefson. The name itself was a statement derived from Megadeath, a military term for 1 million deaths by nuclear explosion. From the beginning, Mustaine made it clear that Megadeth wasn't just another metal band, but a vehicle for his revenge against Metallica. Songwriting credits remain the most contentious issue between Mustaine and Metallica. Mustaine has maintained for decades that he wrote substantial portions of several songs on Metallica's first 2 albums without proper recognition. In a revealing interview, Hetfield addressed these claims directly. Dave contributed to The Four Horsemen, which was based on his song Mechanics. He contributed to Jump in the Fire, to Metal Militia, and parts of Phantom Lord. Nobody has ever denied that. But Hetfield challenged Mustaine's characterization. What Dave doesn't talk about is how much those songs changed after he left. The Four Horsemen became a completely different song structurally and lyrically. We kept some of his riffs, yes, but a riff isn't a song. Former Metallica producer Flemming Rasmussen offered perspective. If you listen to the early demos with Dave and compare them to the final recordings, there are significant differences. Bands evolve songs together. It's rarely as simple as, I wrote this, you wrote that. The late Cliff Burton, Metallica's revered bassist whose philosophical approach and classical training elevated the band's early compositions, reportedly played a significant role in restructuring these disputed songs. According to session musicians present during the recording of Kill 'Em All, Burton spent hours reworking arrangements, suggesting tempo changes and adding harmonic complexities that transformed the raw material into more sophisticated compositions. Kirk Hammett, who stepped in as lead guitarist after Mustaine's dismissal, has maintained a diplomatic stance throughout the decades. When reached for comment about the controversy, he emphasized the collaborative nature of Metallica's creative process. I came into a situation where songs were still taking shape. Everyone contributed to making them what they ultimately became. That's how bands work. It's organic, fluid. No song is ever really finished until it's recorded. Over 40 years, Kill 'Em All has sold millions of copies, with these disputed tracks becoming staples of Metallica's live shows and generating significant royalties. Music industry attorney Brian Rosenblatt explains, in the early days of thrash metal, bands often didn't formalize songwriting agreements. They were creating music, not paperwork. That lack of documentation made later disputes almost inevitable when the stakes grew to millions. After his departure from Metallica, Mustaine quickly formed Megadeth, driven by what he openly described as a desire to create a band faster and heavier than his former group. For 4 decades, the two bands developed on parallel paths, with Metallica achieving mainstream commercial success, while Megadeth built a reputation for technical precision and political themes. In his interviews, Hetfield acknowledged Mustaine's accomplishments. Dave built something incredible with Megadeth. Those early albums, Peace Sells, Rust in Peace, they're untouchable. No one can take that away from him. But Hetfield also expressed frustration with what he sees as Mustaine's inability to celebrate his own success without referencing Metallica. At some point, you have to stop defining yourself by what you lost and start celebrating what you built. Megadeth isn't great because it's not Metallica. It's great because Dave created something unique. Industry insiders note that the Metallica-Megadeth rivalry helped shape the entire thrash metal movement. These bands pushed each other, explains Metal Hammer editor Eleanor Goodman. When Master of Puppets raised the bar, Megadeth responded with Peace Sells. When Megadeth released Rust in Peace, Metallica answered with the Black Album. The competition made both bands better. This creative rivalry extended to their business approaches as well. While Metallica embraced a more mainstream sound and image that opened doors to stadium tours and diamond-selling albums, Megadeth maintained a more technically complex style that appealed to metal purists. Beyond his well-documented feud with Metallica, Mustaine's volatile behavior affected his relationships with other bands in the thrash metal scene, particularly Slayer. Tom Araya, born on June 6, 1961, in Viña del Mar, Chile, had his own path to metal stardom. His family immigrated to the United States when he was 5, settling in Southgate, California. Unlike Mustaine, Araya came from a stable, hardworking family. His father was a worker at a leather tanning factory, and both parents emphasized the importance of education and hard work. Araya's entry into music came through his older brother, who played guitar and introduced Tom to bands like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. Initially playing bass to accompany his brother, Araya quickly developed a passion for heavy music. While working as a respiratory therapist, a career he maintained even during Slayer's early years, Araya joined forces with Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman to form Slayer in 1981. By 1986, both Megadeth and Slayer had established themselves as pioneering forces in thrash metal. Slayer's album Rain and Blood, produced by Rick Rubin, was revolutionizing the genre with its unprecedented speed and intensity. Meanwhile, Megadeth had released Peace Sells, But Who's Buying?, showcasing Mustaine's technical prowess and songwriting skills. The thrash metal scene, though competitive, was also collaborative. Bands often shared stages, influenced each other's music, and maintained friendships despite professional rivalries. This spirit of camaraderie led to discussions about potential collaborations between various thrash bands, including the idea of a split release or joint tour featuring Slayer and Megadeth. In late 1986, executives from both Combat Records, Megadeth's label, and Def Jam, Slayer's label, arranged a meeting at a Los Angeles recording studio. The proposed collaboration was ambitious: a split EP featuring new tracks from both bands, followed by a co-headlining tour across North America. For fans, this would have been the ultimate thrash experience. For the labels, it represented significant commercial potential. The meeting was scheduled for 1 p.m. on a Wednesday. Araya, Kerry King, Jeff Hanneman, and Dave Lombardo from Slayer arrived on time, as did the label representatives and studio engineers. Ellefson from Megadeth also showed up promptly, apologetically explaining that Mustaine was on his way. Hours passed. Phone calls went unanswered. The Slayer members, known for their professionalism despite their aggressive music, waited patiently at first, then with growing frustration. Studio time was expensive, and the clock was ticking. When Mustaine finally arrived shortly after 4 p.m., it was immediately clear he was intoxicated. According to multiple witnesses, he stumbled into the control room, interrupted a conversation between Araya and a producer, and launched into a rambling critique of Slayer's production sound on Rain and Blood. The tension in the room was palpable. King, already known for his directness, responded with a comment about Megadeth's recent performances. Witnesses recall King saying something to the effect of, "At least we can play our songs live without screwing them up." This seemingly offhand remark touched a nerve with Mustaine. What happened next has become infamous in metal circles. Mustaine spotted Kerry King's custom BC Rich Warlock guitar, a distinctive instrument with a jagged body design that had become part of King's signature look. This wasn't just any guitar. It was a custom-built piece with specific modifications for King's playing style, valued at several $1,000s. In a moment of rage, Mustaine grabbed the guitar from its stand, shouted something that witnesses later couldn't agree on the exact wording of, and smashed it against a nearby amplifier. The neck cracked, the body splintered, and pieces of the guitar scattered across the studio floor. The room fell silent, except for the sound of the broken guitar parts settling on the floor. Then chaos erupted. King lunged toward Mustaine but was held back by Lombardo and Hanneman. Araya, typically the most level-headed member of Slayer, stepped between the parties, trying to defuse the situation. Ellefson, mortified by his bandmates' behavior, attempted to apologize, but the damage, both to the guitar and to any potential for collaboration, was irreparable. Label executives quickly ended the meeting, escorting the still furious King from the room, while Araya stayed behind to assess the situation. In a 2010 interview that has since become legendary among metal fans, Araya recounted the aftermath. "It wasn't even about the guitar, though Carey was furious about that for years. You can replace instruments. It was the disrespect, to Carey, to all of us, to the people who had set up the meeting, to the fans who would have loved what we could have created together. That's what couldn't be fixed." The fallout from the incident was swift and far-reaching. The planned collaboration was immediately cancelled. Combat Records contemplated legal action against Mustaine for jeopardizing the deal, but ultimately decided against it, fearing negative publicity. Def Jam's Rick Rubin, who had championed the collaboration, was reportedly so disappointed that he vowed never to work with Megadeth. The financial impact was substantial. Industry insiders estimated that the cancelled collaboration and tour represented potential lost revenue of $2 to $3 million, a significant sum in mid-1980s music industry terms. More damaging was the effect on Megadeth's reputation within the tight-knit metal community. Word of the incident spread quickly through the music industry. Other bands became hesitant to share bills with Megadeth, fearing similar unpredictable behavior. Promoters, concerned about the reliability of shows, sometimes required additional guarantees or deposits when booking Megadeth. For Slayer, the incident strengthened their bonds with other thrash bands. Araya, King, Hanneman, and Lombardo maintained close relationships with members of Metallica, Anthrax, and Exodus. These connections would later facilitate collaborations like the Clash of the Titans tour in 1990 and 1991, which notably did not include Megadeth on its European leg. Throughout the late 1980s, Mustaine's reputation as difficult to work with persisted. Despite Megadeth's growing commercial success with albums like So Far So Good, So What, 1988, and Rust in Peace, 1990, many in the industry kept their distance. The chasm between Megadeth and other thrash bands was most evident in 1991, when Slayer, Anthrax, and Metallica participated in a legendary tour known as the Clash of the Titans. Megadeth was eventually added to the North American leg of the tour, but interactions between the bands were reportedly minimal and strained. Kerry King, never one to mince words, was quoted in a 1991 One Metal magazine saying he'd rather open for a garage band playing their first show than share a stage with Mustaine. This quote circulated widely, further cementing the public perception of the feud. While the professional rift was significant, the personal animosity between Mustaine and members of Slayer continued behind the scenes. At various festivals where both bands performed throughout the 1990s, they were scheduled on different days or at opposite ends of the venue. When they did encounter each other backstage, interactions were reportedly cold and brief. Araya, though less publicly vocal about the feud than King, maintained his distance from Mustaine. In rare interviews where he discussed the situation, he typically focused on the professional aspects rather than personal attacks, noting that different approaches to music and professionalism made collaboration difficult. Meanwhile, Mustaine was fighting his own battles. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, his struggles with addiction intensified. His behavior became increasingly erratic, affecting Megadeth's performances and internal dynamics. Band members came and went, with Megadeth experiencing more lineup changes than almost any other major thrash band. The bassist who joined the newly formed Megadeth, David Ellefson, found himself in the uncomfortable position of mediator throughout various phases of the conflict. His long tenure with Megadeth, combined with his periods of reconciliation with Metallica's members during Big Four events, gave him a unique perspective. "I've seen both sides up close," Ellefson shared during a bass clinic. "The narrative has become almost mythological in metal circles, but the reality is that both of these guys were barely out of their teens when all this happened. The decisions made then have echoed through their entire careers, for better or worse." The story might have ended there. Another rock and roll feud lost to history. If not for the evolution both parties underwent in the following decades.